Hi, my name is Joe Goldberg. I'm a member of Control-M Solutions Marketing. This video demonstrates how organizations can modernize their workflow orchestration using Control-M and the AWS Mainframe Modernization Service. This combined offer was announced at BMC Exchange in October and presented at AWS reInvent in November of 2022. Control-M today has several hundred mainframe customers, and almost 100% of them are managing mainframe and non-mainframe workloads. So when such a customer considers modernizing their ZOS environment, I think it's very safe to say that the AWS Mainframe Modernization Service will not be the first use of cloud and AWS services for that organization. Likely they are already building and running various analytics and data-intensive applications that use services like S3, Glue, Lambda, step functions, and many others. Let's take a look at how that appears in Control-M today and how that would evolve, considering that they would be moving towards AWS Mainframe Modernization Service for some of their ZOS workloads, possibly all of them, but over a period of time. So what you see here is a banking flow that runs on a regular day. Again, this is of course abridged, but it is a good representation. These are all jobs that are running on ZOS. If you were to look at the details, you can see some of the output, and you would recognize this immediately as being jobs that run on a real ZOS environment. You can take a look at the output. You can take a look at the JCL that is being submitted. And these flows are updating customer databases, reconciling accounts, handling payments, performing risk management, and eventually some of the output of these traditional application flows is then going to be consumed by some analytics applications. These new applications are perhaps also ingesting Twitter data for customer sentiment, or some other kind of modern data sources in addition to the traditional data sources coming from the banking application. So now let's say this organization has decided to undertake a modernization project. And some of these workflows that are currently running on native ZOS are going to be moved to AWS Mainframe Modernization Service. Let's take a look at how that's going to appear. I'll explain this more a little bit further, but for now, we will manually load the equivalent jobs, some of which are still ZOS workload, and some that have been modernized. And I'm going to be using the component of Control-M called Automation API to manually request these jobs to be run. Let's return to Control-M to see how those flows look. So you can see that the front end, or the first part of this application flow, is exactly the same because they are in fact identical jobs. And you can even look at the little icon that indicates they are still running on ZOS. But at some point, in this case, it looks like just part of the flow, but in fact it could be different components from different applications have been modernized, and they have been moved to AWS Mainframe Modernization Service. If we look at the job details, and we'll look at this in a little bit further detail in what is called the planning domain, but here we already see that we have Mainframe Modernization Application ID, which is some of the information on the AWS service side, which we'll explore momentarily. If you look at the execution of these jobs, you can see that, of course, the very same jobs are going to execute exactly the same way. But even at the point where we have transitioned from native ZOS to AWS Mainframe Modernization Service, the look and feel from an operational perspective is exactly the same. And that is really the whole point. Once we get to the jobs that are running on AWS Mainframe Modernization Service, let's take a look at what that service looks like from the AWS console perspective. What you see here in this window, as you can see, is AWS Mainframe Modernization and the specific application that we are running our jobs in or on. We should expect AWS Mainframe Modernization Service jobs to begin executing after this totals 1 job completes. CBank is our first AWS Mainframe Modernization job, and you can see a new entry has just popped up. This job is in the process of being submitted. If we keep refreshing this information, we will eventually see that particular job running, as well as all of the other AWS Mainframe Modernization jobs being submitted. So we can see that all of the AWS Mainframe Modernization Service jobs have now completed successfully. And if we return to Control-M, we can see that following our traditional banking application, our analytics application runs. And we have requested another instance of that analytics application, and you can see it is now running after our banking application has completed successfully. If you look at these side by side as we are right now, from an operational perspective, they look identical. And that is one of the key capabilities that Control-M is providing in this kind of an environment. Of course, this analytics application is running file transfers, pushing data to S3. It's running a glue job, a Lambda job, pushing data into Redshift. And all of this is wrapped in what Control-M calls an SLA management job, which defines an SLA and defines what we in the Control-M world call a business service. The way this appears is if we go over to the services view, we have a tile for every service. If we focus on just the ones that we're interested in, you can see that we have here a few instances of our traditional banking process as well as analytics. And of course, we have 2 instances because we ran a fully native ZOS version as well as a modernized version that consisted of both ZOS and AWS Mainframe Modernization Service jobs. This same kind of consistent view applies to everything in the Control-M environment. If we now go and take a look at how we define these jobs, all definition is done in what we call the planning domain. And if we look at the folders, let's filter them for our application. We can look at the original jobs that run on ZOS natively, and then the hybrid workflows that run both on ZOS and using the AWS services. Of course, there are some differences. Native jobs use JCL. That JCL may reside either in a PDS or it could be provided in line. There are a variety of ZOS specific parameters related to that particular operating system and that environment. Whereas in the AWS Mainframe Modernization Service, the back-end engine is Micro Focus. And the specifications for that type of a job are then dependent on the capabilities provided by the AWS service. So as we can see here, it's far fewer parameters, but the things that are specific are defining what we call a connection profile. This identifies the instance of the AWS Mainframe Modernization Service as defined via AWS. When you define such an environment, you get an application ID, which we specify here. Within that definition, we specify where JCL resides. It is in an S3 bucket that is part of this application configuration, and we specify the JCL file name or the object that exists in that S3 bucket as defined in the application configuration. In all other scheduling parameters and control M definitions, these jobs are going to be exactly the same. The calendars will be the same. The prerequisites, which determine when these jobs run, are going to be specified the same way. What we call post-processing or if actions, telling Control M what actions to take to either analyze the job for success or failure, or to determine what is going to happen after this job completes. All of that will be exactly the same. And as we saw, capabilities such as SLA management, gathering data for insights into workflow behavior, archiving output via workload archiving, managing file transfers, all of the other capabilities that Control M provides for all other jobs will apply to these jobs as well. And so the intent here is to show you how, if you need to run both native ZOS workload together with AWS Mainframe Modernization Service workload, either during the transition or for some period of time, because some applications will remain on the ZOS platform whereas others will migrate, you have complete freedom of choice to run and manage your workload however you need. Even in the cases, and we'll return now to VS Code that I used before, in using or applying a DevOps or a CI/CD methodology to managing your workflow definitions and your workflow artifacts, here too, you can manage the AWS Mainframe Modernization workload exactly the same way that you manage your ZOS native workload. What we see here are jobs. This is the analytics jobs that are common and have been running and using AWS services. So we can see file transfer. In this case, it's pushing data to S3. We can use the same facilities to pull data from S3 or to move data between S3 and a variety of other sources, including not only on-prem file systems, but other cloud environments as well, if you happen to be also using Azure or Google Cloud Platform. The portion of the jobs that have not migrated from ZOS remain as they did before. And the portion that is migrated is using the new job type, as we call it, that has been defined for AWS Mainframe Modernization. This is where you specify the parameters we saw earlier, such as the application ID and the JCL file name, along with an object called the connection profile, which defines the instance of this application that you have created via the AWS console or using the AWS CLI. So in this video, what I have shown is how you could manage transitioning from native ZOS to either a combination or exclusively running AWS Mainframe Modernization Service jobs and maintain and preserve all of the investment that you have made in how you manage and monitor your application workflows in a Control M environment.